it's Nikki Dorda in mediation. Message today is just believing in love is not going to save you from everything. Thinking all is love is not going to save you from everything. Because what you're essentially saying is that there's nothing else and therefore everything is going to be great. You can't avoid certain things in your life. Now, this came up in a conversation when we were talking about the kind of abuses of power that can happen when you have someone in a position of power, like a boss, a mentor, a teacher, anyone in that, a psychiatrist, a doctor, anyone in that position, with a client, a patient, a customer. So, and they said, well, they kind of insinuated that if you only think about only think about the good things, then, and don't acknowledge anything else, then your life will all be great. And that's not the case. If you are having a bad time, does not mean that there's an absence of love for you, for yourself, for the world. You aren't loved or you do not love. There's some things we cannot escape. There's some experiences we can't escape. There are some that we can by, working through our previous patterns that pop up and think, well, actually, let me face this head on. But there are certain experiences that we kind of end up having to go through. Now, even if we could have, in hindsight, kind of worked through them in a different way and kind of, I guess people would have avoided that experience. Let's be gentle on ourselves. We all are vulnerable at certain times, and by turning around and saying all is love, and you're obviously just and there's this implicit idea in that you're not good enough, and that's why you had that experience, because you were too busy thinking about the bad things and they happened. Sometimes we can kind of say that, and other times we can say, really, that's not really the case. We need to be very careful in our language of when we're saying things like this, because I think when you look at these type of statements, which are very prevalent in the kind of spiritual mystical world. Sorry, my nose is I'm sniffing. I don't know why. I think it's the pollen. So I apologise. I should have, and I seem to have no tissue. There is no. We keep trying to apply that in a way that implies that we're punishing people. People are being punished if they are, in a situation where someone abuses that power. And that's where this original conversation comes from. We need to be really careful about our use of language. We need to understand that. And also for ourselves, if we've been in those situations, however old we are, we have to sometimes say, yeah, I was vulnerable at that time and this happened. In hindsight, yes, I should have done all these things, I didn't. But don't beat yourself up about it. You have to go, at that time, I was going through this and I allowed this to happen. You're still not to blame for it. You can look at a vulnerability and go, I was vulnerable, and if I was, going through that again, I would recognise it and do all these things. But you can also go, okay, that happened and I have to accept that, and I shouldn't beat myself up about it. It's an experience that I've learned from and I've grown from, and I now know what to do to prevent it happening again. But that doesn't mean you're to blame for what happened to you, because you didn't perpetrate it. You might have been, and I'm talking more in the situations where you've got, say, abuse and other traumas, and, they involve other people and other situations that we can't control the world. We can only control how we react to it. And the same with situations. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react, how we experience it, how we, work through it. And I was talking to one of my colleagues at my day job, and he's just had quite a horrific experience. But what I loved about him is that instead of kind of wallowing, because that person who always talks about that one incident or that big thing that they have, and it's the only thing they can talk about, and you meet that before you meet them. He looked on the bright side. It was like, well, I didn't have to, have major surgery. I didn't have this. So yeah, he had pain, he had all these things, but he looked on the other side of it and he was able to see it. And I think that is kind of helps us. It stops us wallowing in that. It stops us keeping in as a victim of that experience. It can keep people just in that, and the person I'm talking about in your life that like you kind of like want to take a shot every time they talk about something like that. But he had such a normal spin, and I don't want to say positive because it was positive, but it was a very much like an acceptance of it happened, but all these good things happened outside of it. So the silver lining, without minimizing the other stuff that happened to him. So how we frame something, how we experience it is really important, but let's not minimize other people's experience. Let's not add any blame to them. Let's not start telling them that they should have actually done things better. And as people, we should not blame ourselves for that. Circumstances happen. Let's roll with the punches. Let's not go through that again. Let's patch that vulnerability. And I always use an IT term, probably because I work in IT, and when we are vulnerable in a situation and someone exploited that, then we can either do two things. We can ignore that and just think, oh, it's all the other person's fault, and therefore I've got nothing to do with it. Or we can say, okay, well, in hindsight, I could have done this, this, and this because I kind of recognised it in hindsight. Going forward, I'm going to kind of patch that vulnerability, like Microsoft releasing a patch or Apple, and therefore I won't be vulnerable to that again. But at no point are you to blame for it. So you kind of have to go, but it was still them, they still exploited that. And that exploitation is not my responsibility. It is theirs, and I do not. You can't start, like going, I did this, and this happened to me, and therefore I'm to blame for that. So let's throw that out. Let's separate it and go, well, could I have actually done anything different to have helped to have either not gone through having to go through that, or were there warning signs and red flags that I didn't see, which but now through experience I see. So that is my question to you, is think about the way you talk about things. Think about the way that you whether you're accepting blame for things that aren't yours, and also think about how you could be invalidating someone's experience. If you're saying certain things, then like you might be making someone feel like they should be to blame for it. So let's all look at our use of language. Let's not blame others. Let's not look at people's experience and start pointing the finger at them, and vice versa. Let's not do that to ourselves. So it's my rambling message for today.